Worried about letting someone else pick out the perfect avocado for your perfect impress them on the third date guacamole? Well, good thing Instacart shoppers are as picky as you are. They find ripe avocados like it's their guac on the line. They are milk expiration date detectives. They bag eggs like the 12 precious pieces of cargo they are. So let Instacart shoppers overthink your groceries so that you can overthink what you'll wear on that third date. Download the Instacart app today to get free delivery on your first 3 orders, while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, we're super excited to have writer Ian McDonald here, who wrote Woman of the Hour, directed by Anna Kendrick. Welcome to the show!
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
We're really excited to chat with you about this movie and your pick. I cannot wait to get to your pick. But
what a great true crime doubleheader, though, let's be real. This is kind of like a weirdly true crime themed episode, if you think about it.
Yeah. No, I was thinking about maybe Zodiac. Somehow that seemed a little too on the nose. And also it just came out when I was older. I was too old for it to properly scar me.
Fair.
Yeah. All right, but let's talk about Woman of the Hour, because I'm dying to hear about the genesis of this movie. But to start out, can you tell listeners a little bit about the film?
Yeah, sure. So, Woman of the Hour it's a true crime film about this serial killer named Rodney Alcala, who was working, feels like the wrong way to put it, but he was killing people between 1968 and 1979, I believe. And he occupies this weird little footnote in true crime history where he was on that TV show, The Dating Game. Stranger still, he won. There was just something about this story that I thought was really interesting and kind of thematically relevant about the way that good people kind of look the other way and how that's kind of what allows bad people to get away with bad behavior. It's kind of like, how did nobody do a background check on this guy before putting him on national TV, where the winner of the game show is just we're going to send you two away to Carmel for a weekend to get, that's weird. Somebody should have looked into him. And by the time he was on the show, he had already been arrested twice for attempted murder.
The 70s, man, they were wild.
Yeah, I don't know. And so, it's about that. And it alternates between two different points of view. It's the main character is a woman named Cheryl, who's the contestant on the game show. And that's played by Anna Kendrick. And then she goes on the show basically because, she's been told it's going to help get her seen as an actress and get her name out there. And she, of course, has no idea who any of the 3 bachelors on the other side of the partition are, and one of them's a serial killer. And slowly it becomes apparent that one of them is kind of winning the game. And basically at each commercial break, we sort of cut back in time and we show how Rodney became who he was. And that's kind of the movie in a nutshell.
I love that format. And I was curious how you kind of, in writing, decided how to tell the story and how you wanted to focus the story. Because with true crime, I know it is there's so much discussion, especially now, about true crime and whose story you're telling and the perspective. Yeah. So I was curious what that was like for you as the writer and how to attack this essentially and tell the story you wanted to tell and how you wanted to tell it.
Yeah. So, it's funny. There are certain things that are kind of just baked into the idea that you can't get away from that sort of dictate the direction of the story by their very nature. So each episode of The Dating Game has 2 sequences that are both 12 minutes long. And so the amount of time he was on the show was 12 minutes. So that's not really going to make for much of a feature film. And so kind of right there, it's probably going to be nonlinear. Okay, so what are you cutting away to? And there's like a domino effect that happens with these decisions, and that's like the more technical part of it. But more than that, there was just something really interesting about using this story as a way of talking about sort of the risks we take when we choose to be intimate with someone else, and that can be dating or friendships or work, like workplace friendships. One of the stories I read about Rodney that kind of cemented my interest in like adapting this I read an interview with one of his coworkers at the LA Times. Like he worked there back in the 70s. And they said he used to bring in these photo albums of like his photographs. One time he brought them in and there was like essentially a bunch of photos of like nude underage, boys and girls basically. Mm-hmm. And everyone kind of bristled at that and is just like, whoa, what's this? And, he kind of laughed it off as though the people who were bristling at it were like, basically he was treating it like he was like a sexual libertarian. Like, come on, it's not the 50s anymore. Like, and he was like cloaking his bad behavior in progressive language. And that's kind of the sort of shtick that he would pull that would help normalize his behavior. And it's just like, we see that all the time. We see sort of good people look the other way when they kind of feel like they probably shouldn't. And that helps bad people get away with the things they do. And I found that really interesting. I mean, it's weird that it's coming out now. I wrote the first outline of it almost 8 years ago at this point.
Wow.
And so I was researching this right around the time when the Trump locker room tape thing broke loose. And so that was really the socio-political connection that I was making. But beyond that, I started just reading about the women who he attacked, and, they were all really interesting and they had, full, meaningful lives. And so the goal was always to try to focus on them and make sure that it wasn't a film, because some true crime films can like, in the same way that like how many anti-war movies are really anti-war movies, oftentimes they make it look heroic even when they're not meaning to. There are true crime movies where the killer looks, cool. And
yes.
We tried to be very mindful about not doing that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's so helpful having Anna Kendrick be the director and having having a female voice with you, like as you as the writer and then her in that director's seat really help that conversation too, and really make sure that those, I'm not always a woman who's going to tell that story the right way, but I know it's helpful to have that perspective guiding it as well. So I love that about this movie. Oh yeah, absolutely. She was very closely involved in sort of developing the screenplay and figuring out the right direction it should go in, and so I mean, because any screenplay is really only as good as the collaborators that are surrounding it. And she was great to work with in that way.
So this was, it sounds like sometimes people write a script and then, a director gets it and they're not involved. So was this a collaborative project for you and Anna at all?
So basically I wrote it as a spec script, and it was just kind of sent out into the town, and it went to a number of different producers. There were other directors attached at various points. And it kept kind of getting close to production, and then something would go wrong and it would fall apart. And then, and so she was attached just as an actor for 2 full years before she ended up signing on to direct it. So basically, things went from moving very, very, very slowly to moving incredibly fast.
Wow.
And at the time where we started moving incredibly fast, that's when we lost our previous director. And it sort of looked like, it's just fallen apart all over again. And that's kind of when Anna stepped in and basically said, I think I want to do this. And she literally saved the film.
Wow.
Holy shit.
She's really good. Like, this is a great, like, the choices, particularly in that opening sequence, the opening kind of kill, her directorial choices were fantastic. So I'm glad to see that she got to step up to the plate and be not just an actor, but a director with this one. Cause I was really enamored with the way the movie played out, both from a narrative perspective, but also a visual one.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the first time I met with her, I said, like, so how are you seeing this? Because, each director has their own perspective on how it should be filmed and how it should feel. And she said, well, I kind of want it to feel like Zodiac meets No Country for Old Men. And I'm just like, fuck, this is going to be amazing. Like, you just named my two favorite films. Like, yes.
Hell yeah.
And you can definitely see those influences in there, but also there's stuff in there that's just pure Anna, like it has this real wry sense of humor that I think both those movies have a sense of humor, but like there's something just a little more arch and a little more satirical about what she brings to it. Yeah, so I mean, I was thrilled. It was such a pleasure working with her.
I was curious how did you do a lot of prep in terms of watching the dating game? Because I have to admit, I remember seeing some like episodes of that on TV when I was a kid, and I was like, what is this? But to see it in here and to kind of be taken back to that time, it's like, what a time capsule.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, it's oh Lord, it was. Reading about the crimes is really depressing, but watching just normal people try to be spontaneous and clever on national television is also really depressing, just in a different way. It's interesting too, because if you're to go on YouTube right now and look for old episodes, you're going to find, the last I checked, like almost none. Like there's a handful of clips here and there, but when I started, there was actually a lot. Okay. And it was interesting because the Cheryl character in the movie became kind of an amalgamation of different women who I saw on the show. Like there was one woman, and I can't find the clip now because they've taken it down, who kind of hijacked the show and like went rogue on the host and was like asking these like really kind of these questions where it's just like, oh, you kind of know what's going on. You know that the show has kind of a sexist tinge to it, and some of the questions are a little demeaning, and you are shining a spotlight on that. And again, I can't find it now, but yeah, I remember it was so fascinating and so interesting. But yeah, the Rodney episode, unfortunately, like so you can see his clips, like Cheryl's questions, Rodney's answers, but you can't see any of the stuff of the other bachelors on that. Like all that's been stripped from the internet. So we had to essentially take some dramatic license with that section because of that.
Oh, and did you ever try to like contact anyone to get access to the original episode? Is that something you could do?
Yeah, no. I mean, basically, I think it's ABC. I don't know, but the studio just does not want that episode out there. Like,
okay, that makes sense.
Honestly, okay. I sympathize for fair reasons. Who really wants to be associated with a serial killer, especially if you're like the other dudes on that show.
Fair.
So, it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go back a little bit. And when you were growing up, did you have an interest in genre and true crime? Was that something you were drawn to when you were younger?
Okay. So this is the thing I find so interesting about your show. Okay. And when I agonized over like, okay, do I talk about Se7en? Do I talk about something else? Because there are so many ways in which one could address this. If I'm being truly, truly honest, the most disturbing thing I saw as a child was Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Like the Large Marge scene, like
Large Marge.
I tried to watch it when I was 18, and as it got closer to the scene, I'm like, nope, can't do it. There was something about that just fucking ruined me. But like, it's weird. When I was like a really scared kid. I think this is the case with a lot of horror people. I remember going to a friend's house when I was like 8 years old, and they put in the movie Alien, and immediately like the chest bursting thing happened. I'm just like, nope, going home. Can't do it.
Okay, we're on the same page. I gotta say, because my parents sat me down to watch Alien, and all I knew at that time was like aliens, like it's spaceships. I grew up like watching 50s horror movies and 50s like alien movies. So like I'm thinking flying saucers, thinking little gray men, or like the robot from The Day the Earth Stood Still. And the moment the alien burst out of the guy's chest, we turned it off, and I was like, they looked at my face and they're like smiling, like, did they get you? And I'm like, what did I just see? So I can't imagine seeing that at a slumber party.
At a sleepover. And it's also just like, you're not in your own environment. You don't get to go to your own bed at the end of the night. It was But it's weird. So it was always like a tug of war for me, you know, like there's this children's book that my parents read me when I think I was 5 called The Talipo. And it is the bleakest fucking children's book you will ever read. It basically is like an old man in the woods with his 3 dogs, and there's this creature that sneaks into his house, and basically it kills the dogs and then it kills him. Okay. And this is a book meant for children. And it kind of became, did you ever read
just a soothing goodnight tale before you fall asleep?
Well, it was funny. Did you ever read Calvin and Hobbes? You know, he has that picture book that like something Huey and the Gooey Kablooey. Like he's obsessed with this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Calvin needs to have this book read to him every night. That became my version of that. But it would also keep me awake. And so my parents like changed the ending and wrote in a happy ending on the back cover. And it just made me really angry. And I'm just like, you're lying to me. He dies. The old man dies. And so then they kept reading the original. Anyways, and so it scared me, but I also loved it. And that was basically me up until I was like 18 or something, like, or maybe 15 or 16. I was always very free.
Wow.
So you loved being scared, but hated it at the same time, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I just, I had an overactive imagination and I really loved the story. But then as soon as the lights were off, I was just 100% sure the Talipo was like at the foot of my bed. Like,
oh yeah, I was the same way. I loved the stories. And then when I was alone with my thoughts, I was like, fuck, that's going to get me now. Like I watch scary stuff all the time. And my mom was like, you are going to be scared. I'm like, no, I'm not. I was.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but I still did it.
Yeah, that's one of the things for me, it was scary stories to tell in the dark. Like the pictures, particularly in that one, it was like, I'd read it and I'd be like, ooh, that's spooky. But then I'd see the pictures and those images would just linger in my head at night. Absolutely.
Yeah. I hated them, and I have a blanket of that scary fucking scarecrow Harold on my bed, and I want to get a tattoo of one of them. So it's like, what's wrong with me? Like, it's obviously like etched its way into my psyche.
Yeah. Do you remember, didn't they like re-release those books a while ago, but with like new illustrations?
Yes.
And it's weird because it's like when you're a kid, like, I mean, that's part of the fun when you're a kid is like, I think we actually kind of want that. We want to be a little scared, What was it? Neil Gaiman said this thing once that I really loved, where he was talking about the pushback to the Graveyard Book, the opening line of the Graveyard Book was, in the darkness there was a hand, and in the hand there was a knife. And you read it and you're just like, this fucking one, the Caldecott? Like, like this is a kid's book. And he said, like, look, I've read it to a lot of kids. Adults seem to be more upset than children are, because if you're a child, when you read this, you just go, oh, it's the protagonist of a story. It's me. I get to be the hero of a story. But if you're an adult, you think, oh, that's a child, and so it feels more malicious in some ways.
As someone that grew up kind of I was born in 81, so like I grew up kind of in the 80s in particular. So like seeing the kind of stuff that was being marketed to kids or things that were being written for kids, and then sort of seeing the way in which we kind of have kids gloves almost now for a lot of the mainstream content that we put out. Yeah. I mean, kids are still able to access like the wildest stuff on the internet, but like in terms of what we're producing and giving to kids, it does feel as if like a lot of that has been defanged in some way. And I think the Scary Stories new artwork kind of points to that fact that like, these are too terrifying for kids, so let's make it more cutesy, and it just doesn't work.
Well, it's also funny because, like I was saying, like Pee-wee's Big Adventure really scared me. The other one that terrified me as a kid was I think it was called Ernest Scared Stupid, the Ernest movie.
Yep.
Yes, we've covered that one too.
Yeah, and it was just like, that movie would put Cronenberg to shame. It is so deeply Freudian. It is, you have to squirt milk on these people so that they don't turn you into Littlewood. It is like profoundly upsetting. But it's funny because even like my favorite movie at the same age was Terminator 2, and that is a very violent movie. But it's weird because even as a kid, I remember thinking like, okay, Terminator 2 is trying to be suspenseful and scary, and it's working. And then I would look at the Ernest movie and be like, this was made for children. They think this is entertaining me. And I thought the makers were maybe insane. And that was the thing that made me feel unsafe, where I'm just like, who thinks that this is fun? You know?
Yeah.
That's
What
such a good
what a
point,
wild
though.
movie.
It truly is that, like, you think a little too hard about, like, who is thinking that children like these things? It's a very strange thing to, like, think about, like, who... Never mind. It's fine, guys.
Yeah,
like,
And yet I loved Ernest Scared Stupid. I loved it as a kid so much.
It has a real zany appeal. I will give you that.
Yeah.
It's true. Zany appeal is a good way to put it, honestly.
Yeah.
So as an adult, do you still have that sort of pull between the scary, or are you kind of more desensitized now? How do you handle scary movies as an adult?
Oh, no. I mean, there was a certain point, basically around the time I was like, I think it was like 16. Like, my first ambition was really to be like a special effects artist,
Okay.
And so, like, I would go to my dentist and like ask him to give me like alginate. I don't remember how, but the stuff they do to make molds of teeth, and I would make molds of my friend's arms and make severed limbs and stuff. And basically, as soon as I started doing that, I'm just like, oh, it's a magic trick. And so all of the really violent stuff, stopped really having an effect, because, suddenly you're just a little more analytical. Mm-hmm. But so it didn't really impact me the same. There's still movies that like scare me. Like, I like it when a movie can do that. It just so rarely happens as an adult,
Do you remember the last movie that... Yeah.
Yep.
God, what was it? I mean, it's tricky. There are movies that sort of, there's different kinds of being scared, like I remember seeing the movie Raw, and just, it is like a fucking 95-minute cringe, full body cringe. And it's like a masterpiece, but holy shit, there are just so many scenes where I'm just like, I'm going to faint. So that's like one kind of scariness. And then there's the other kind of scariness where you think maybe you can't go to sleep because everything, the world suddenly seems darker and stranger and maybe more threatening than it did before. The Orphanage did that to me in a really big way. I don't know why. The movie Wreck, the recording, did that to me. And then there's this other kind of horror that in some ways is like my favorite. Like, favorite's a weird way to put it, but there's a certain kind of horror movie where it's not scary, but it's horrifying, where it kind of unmoors you and it really shakes you. And it's somewhere between drama and horror. And so, like, Under the Skin did that for me, where I felt like cosmically rattled, when it was over.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, like, those are some of the ones in recent years that really did that for me.
Cool. I'm so glad to hear you say The Orphanage, because I feel like a lot of people have slept on that movie. I remember seeing in the movie theater and just bawling my eyes out and being distraught by the ending. And it's a quiet film, but there are moments in there that just like stick in my mind. Like, I'll never forget the older woman when she gets hit by a car and like we see a image of her face, or the game of the knocking and then turning around, just like it just leaves a lingering feeling in you that is not right.
Yeah, it's weird. It's very elegant, and it works so well as a horror movie that it's easy to kind of forget how sort of sad and soulful it is at the same time. It is, like, from a horror perspective, it is a Swiss watch of a movie. It is perfectly made. Like, the knocking on the wall thing with the camera going back and forth, just perfectly executed. Good. And yet there are just so many like little moments that are so touching and funny. And, when the little boy discovers that he's HIV positive and that's what the medication is for, and the parents sit down and try to explain it, and the fact that they lied to him about this, and they said, do you have any questions? And he said, does this mean Santa Claus isn't real too? It's kind of funny and touching, but also just so perfect for the moment. I just
so
love
heartbreaking.
It.
On that note, Ian, what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss? Very different vibes than The Orphanage. I would say.
Yeah, no, I brought another super happy movie, Se7en.
Se7en! Oh my god, I'm so excited. We're finally talking about this movie. For those unfamiliar, very quickly, this is a David Fincher film that follows two detectives, a rookie and a veteran, who are hunting a serial killer who uses the 7 deadly sins as his motive.
All right, Ian, so take us back. How old were you when you saw this movie? How did you see this? Why did you see this? I want to know everything. Give us basically your horror story about why this is your Scarred for Life pick.
Okay, so this is kind of a weird way into it, but okay, so you know how they introduce Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, where before you ever see him, it's just a lot of talk about Hannibal Lecter and how sinister he is and how awful he is. And by the time you actually see him, so much has been said. I mean, this is also the case with just John Doe in Se7en. By the time you see him, he's like larger than life. That was how I kind of like engaged with the movie, where all my friends had seen it. Some of my friends had seen it and some had pretended to have seen it. So I was hearing different stories about what happened in it.
How old were you?
I think it was like 13 or something.
Okay. Prime age of like, I definitely saw that movie with my parents or by myself.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you when yep. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And I remember asking my dad about it because he saw it, and all I knew was, so my dad was also a horror fan, he and got me into this. It was weird because I'm just like, well, so and so said this happens, and so said that happened, and and they're all incredibly disturbing, grisly scenes, and he's just like, look, I don't want to tell you what happens in the movie because your mom would get mad at me, but do you want to know which of your friends actually saw it? And I'm just like, oh, okay. And so that was sort of his way. But it was also like early days of the internet because I'm also, I was born in 84. And so it was around the time when you could spend like, you would download the trailer to Se7en and it would take 6 fucking hours for it. And then you would have this 2.5-minute trailer and I would just watch it endlessly. And I'm just like, what on earth is this? And it's something about it felt dark and sinister and anyways, and I finally saw it. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's a terrifying movie, and it's terrifying in part because it leaves so much up to the imagination. It is kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre-ish in that way. Like the violence happens off screen, but everyone kind of feels like they saw it. I don't know. Mary Beth, you said you had a story about it. What's your story? I'm dying to know.
It's not bad. It's like, okay, I was obsessed with this movie when I saw it. My stepdad showed it to this was like the era when my parents were like finally starting to let me watch rated R movies. Because my dad, I was a kid of divorce. So like my dad, when I'd go to his house on the weekends, would always show me the fucked up movies. Like, I've been watching horror movies for years, but my mom was trying so hard to, like, not be that parent. Like, she wanted so hard to, like, keep me away, but she got to the point where she's like, fuck it. There's, like, she's getting it every weekend from her father. I might as well just, like, embrace it here. And my stepdad was like, hell yeah, and got really stoked and was like, we're gonna watch Se7en. And so my thing with my stepdad was like, I would have him describe Hannibal Lecter books to me and like describe the scenes that Thomas Harris wrote about like Hannibal Lecter hanging people, because he'd read those books and tell them to me and I'd be like, yay, it's so gross. I love hearing about it. Like, this is how I'd hang out with my stepdad.
Amazing.
And so like he was like, this is such a scary movie. It's so fucked up. It's going to like blow your mind. I think I was like 13 or 14 at this point, around that. And there's a specific scene where they go into a room with a man who they think is dead, but he is not dead. And I jumped into the air and I was shaking. I was so scared. And my stepdad told me it was going to happen. And I was so fucking terrified. But this was also the first movie that I had seen that did the whole, like, not showing you everything. And it was, like, the first movie I had experienced that felt that, like, I really had kind of a awareness of feeling dirty and wrong, but also being, like, why do I like this world? Like, why do I like this world and also hate it? Because there's so much world building. I loved this so much that this was, like, my movie to show dates when I was in high school.
I mean, it's a really good weeding out film where it's just like, look, if you don't like this, it's just not meant to be.
I made my 10th grade boyfriend, my best friend and her boyfriend double date and watch this movie in their basement. We tried to make out while watching it, and it's really hard to make out with your boyfriend when there's like that going on behind you.
Yeah, that's.
I did do that though. I did bring. Believe me, I was the weird fucking friend who like to the movie night said, "Let's watch Se7en and make out to Se7en," and they're like, "Who is this bitch?" That we would like keep inviting, and I'm just like, serial killers.
I can actually top that. I'm scared to mention it. I had a girl I was dating over, and again, I was in like 9th grade, and I don't know why I decided to put in Meet the Feebles. If you've ever seen that, it's Peter Jackson's second movie, and it's like the Muppets, but there's like a heroin addicted frog, and has like Vietnam flashbacks. I so wish I could go back in time and just ask, young me, what on earth were you thinking? I'm just like, it's funny.
How did that go? How did that date go? I have never seen Meet the Feebles, but I know a lot about it, and I can't imagine that being the choice.
No, it's not.
I will say, I probably would have been stoked as hell, but I also understand. It is kind of terrifying. Yeah, I was, I'm glad that we were both the weird kids that were like, yeah, no, dates will love this. And they were like, what is wrong with you? Yeah. So Se7en was a big part of like my like middle school to high school life in that I loved watching it and also loved showing it to boys. I also love showing boys Teeth and Midnight Meat Train.
Oh my God.
I am married. So somehow it worked. And I've been with him for a while, and he's pretty cool.
I'm actually really curious about this. Because, okay, I'm going to pivot for 1 second and then come back to this question. Because I see in the background, you have one of my favorite books on the shelf, House of Psychotic Women by Kayla Janice. Yes, it's, I adore that movie. And she talks in it about, like, showing disturbing movies to friends as a way of kind of, like, I don't know, testing them in some ways, or kind of showing, it's like an endurance test for people. Was that part of it for you?
Yeah, I think because I loved it so much, like, I only had my dad really watch these kinds of things with me, and, like, it's my dad, and I wanted to be like, oh, well, my friends can, like, if I can do it, everyone can do it. Like, because I was such a scared kid that I was like, well, if my scared spooky ass can handle this, and, like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, we're in my basement with my parents' house. Like, it's not a huge deal. And I definitely ruined a couple lives that way, I think.
No,
I always had everyone over for Halloween, and I was like, you're not picking the movies, bitch. I am. And I was like, welcome to my dungeon of pain. I was careful. But, like, I watched I Spit on Your Grave at a sleepover once. So, like...
Mary Beth, what?
I don't know, Terry. It was both of our decisions. I hung out with weird people, okay? I don't know.
No, I was very similar as a teenager. So, like, when I was a kid, my mom had my dad had these movies that he really wanted to show me. He wanted to show me, like, The Howling, The Thing, Godfather, and something else. I don't remember. And so basically from the time I was like 7 or 8, he would check in with my mom each year and be like, is he old enough to see it? And she'd be like, no, he's not, and it's just like, okay, wait a year. How about now? Still no. And then one year he, and again, I think I was, 13 or so. He showed me One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which isn't a horror movie, but the opening scene between Jack Nicholson and, like, the admitting doctor has some really rough language, like, not just the words used, but the ideas being used. And my mom overheard it from the other room, and she's like, what are you showing him? And he's just like, it's a great movie. It won 9 Oscars. It da-da-da-da-da. It's art. He needs, because my dad loved art. He loved serious cinema. And she's like, all right, fine. From now on, whatever he watches, like, that's on you. You know, you keep an eye on it. And he's just like, fine. And of course, I'm like rejoicing inside because basically it meant whatever I want to watch, I can watch. And my dad worked down the street from like the cool video store in our town. And so each Friday night, I would just give him a list and he would stop at the video store and he would come home with a stack of movies and he'd be like, here you go. And then my weekend was just watching those movies. And it was like the store that had the like incredibly strange film section. And so that's where I discovered movies like
Meet the Feebles. I'm just kidding.
Peter Jackson's like early movies like Meet the Feebles, Dead Alive, Bad Taste.
Bad Taste.
But, you know, also like kind of, you know, it's where I discovered like Michael Haneke films and Pier Paolo Pasolini and like the like heavy duty European art films that are also just happen to be incredibly disturbing, you know, and I found it really, you know, there's obviously the part of you that's 17 and wants to like test yourself and see like what you can endure. But it's also kind of where I started like appreciating film as like an art form, you know? And so it was like both of those things at once.
My stepdad, it was like I hit a certain age. That's very similar, Ian. Like my stepdad was like, oh, she's like a certain, like once I like hit 8th grade in high school, he's like, oh, you can stay up late now and like watch fucking weird movies with us. And like, it was our thing. My brothers would go to bed. I'm the oldest. And then we would make like fancy ramen because my parents are chefs. So we'd always make like fancy grilled cheese or fancy ramen and then we'd watch a scary movie. And my mom would either say, haha, fuck you, I'm going to bed, or she'd stay up. It depended on how she was feeling. But this was like my bonding time. And Se7en, I think, was one of the first ones I remember watching with them, of being like, it's not quite a horror movie. It's like fucked up, but not super. It's like, it was like kind of the entry point for me with my stepdad. And it was so fun because I felt like a grown up with him. And I could like my stepdad and I have bonded over movies since. He loves, like, I always recommend him like horror movies and he'll be like, I loved Abigail. Like he loves stuff like that. Like he'll watch anything I recommend. He's like the coolest guy. And this was like, and now we quote Se7en at each other all the time because it was like our movie, which again sounds fucked up, but like it's so good and everything about it. And like every kill is so memorable. Every performance, like everything about it is just so incredible. And it's just like, it's so easy to rewatch because it's just like, I feel so timeless the way Fincher makes it. Feels like suspended, like liminal. It's just everything about this movie is just like incredible to me.
Yeah,
even now,
it's really a movie that grows with you. And you know, like there's a lot of goofy horror movies I discovered when I was a teenager that I don't go back and rewatch and revisit because when you do, you go, oh, that's the same movie that I saw when I was 15. I've changed. It hasn't. What I like about Se7en, and I liked about it back then as well, but I've grown to appreciate it more since then, is its intelligence, you know? I feel like, you know, if you really want to appreciate Citizen Kane, like watch it back to back with like How Green Was My Valley, you know, the movie that actually won Best Picture that year, because How Green Was My Valley is a very good movie. Citizen Kane is 30 years ahead of its time. It's just a different thing. And the way you appreciate Se7en is to watch it back to back with like Kiss the Girls. You know, and it's really only then that you go like, oh, this is special. Yeah. And it's intelligent. And it's almost, it feels like, you know, Fincher rightly gets a lot of credit for this. I think Andrew Kevin Walker's screenplay is a masterpiece. Like, because the screenwriter...
come on. The way they reveal things in this movie, just like just everything. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's just like, shocking how like just everything about this, the way the narrative unfolds is just
totally incredible. And by the way, if I start monologuing, feel free to shut me up. I have a lot of enthusiasm for this, and so don't let me hijack this.
No, we love it.
But I mean, there's a way in which like it feels like a Dostoevsky novel. Like a huge amount of narrative real estate is dedicated to guys hanging out in bars talking about morality and wrestling with the meaning of it all, you know, wrestling with whether or not to be apathetic in a dark world or to try to fight against the darkness and make things better. Like these are serious, weighty, meaningful themes. And like one of the things that like because there's a lot of stuff that's like outside of the screenwriter's hand where they don't have control over. But one of the things that they do have control over is like, to a degree anyways, it gets changed in editing, is like how much narrative real estate you dedicate to the plot versus things that are not the plot. And there's a lot of stuff in there that is just not the plot. There are like little things where Morgan Freeman's character has like this wonderful, it's not even a full monologue, it's just a little thing where the police captain is saying like, you're going to retire. How on earth do you think you can retire? You were made for this job. And he says, there was a guy down the street the other night that was stabbed in both eyes. The attacker, attacked him and then ran off. And then he just pauses and says, I don't understand this city anymore. I don't get it. The violence is different somehow. And it's like this nice little aside. It doesn't further the plot. It doesn't really tell you more about the character, but it's this little narrative cul-de-sac that deepens the themes and sort of lets you into the world of the movie more. And that's what I love about it so much. I think it's so smart. And like, I look at it and, I think Andrew Kevin Walker wrote it when he was like, it was released when he was like 30 or something. So it was also a young man writing this.
Yeah. He said he was writing it after he moved into the city from the suburbs and was working at a Tower Records and was what's the, and there's a quote here that he wanted to leave the audience feeling violated and exhausted, aka everything I love about horror filmmaking. So I'm like, yes.
Yeah. And so it's a thriller with an IQ. I mean, like, after watching it, I read somewhere that, like, Morgan Freeman's character was based on this British author, W. Somerset Maugham. So then I went down that rabbit hole and started reading, Of Human Bondage and The Razor's Edge and all these W. Somerset Maugham books. And it's, and so there's just so much to unearth in the movie. There's just layers and layers and layers.
And I like how you mentioned like the narrative cul-de-sacs. So I think that's why the movie has such a lived-in world, even though it's so unspecific. And I love how it just feels like a city.
Yes.
And it's always raining. And you want to be like, oh, it's New York. Oh, it's Chicago. But they very purposefully leave it so. And I love that because, again, it feels like a liminal space. Just like, and it has the same feel as Cure. Have you seen Cure by Kiyoshi Kurosawa?
I haven't seen that one, no.
Oh, you have to see. It's from 1997. He made, it's like Se7en and Cure make. Have you seen Cure, Terry? Have I forced you to watch that? God damn it. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's like incredible double feature with this in terms of like it's a Japanese serial killer film in a rainy Tokyo, and it's just looking at like the mundane life, like urban life, and gray and monotonous and nihilistic, but also fascinating. And it's just I came to this movie because I was a little edgelord and was like, ooh, there's disturbing crime scenes and there's going to be so much blood, and I came out of it like, I feel like I need to take a shower and not talk to anyone for. We mentioned that it's like it's pretty, it's violent. The tableaus we see are really disturbing, but you don't see anyone being actively tortured. Really, you don't see someone having to. A woman is. You don't have to see her like ripping off her face. You don't see a man cutting off a pound of his flesh, but you see these bloody tableaus, similar to what you see in like the Hannibal TV show, which is obviously much later, but you see these the most beautiful like leavings, except for the one that I hate the most, and I'm curious what y'all, is the guy with the dildo. I did not understand that as a child. I was like, what happened? And my family was like, he stabbed a woman. I'm like, so it was like one of those things where my parents were like not quite sure what they could explain to me at the age of 13. They were like, 13 was that weird age of like, how do we explain that? So as I got older, I was watching it. I'm like, holy shit. Like the implications as I got older and realizing what he had, like the connections between showing the special dildo that was made and how it was used. I was like, oh my God, that is the most horrendous, violent death I've ever heard of in my life. And they don't really show you anything. You see the man just screaming and crying for what had happened. And that to me is one of the most harrowing points of this film. It's brief, but I hate every time it just like makes me kind of nauseous.
Oh yeah, no, it's funny that's a scene that I've had different reactions to over the years, where there was a time when I saw it and I'm just like, gosh, I wish they had written it differently, or where because the sex worker is probably someone in a position of poverty who's just trying to make ends meet. Like, really, it's the John who's at fault here. How come he's not the one who's being killed? He's sort of a tool to punish her, not the other way around. But then I thought more about it and I'm just like, yeah, but this is me in 2023. This isn't John Doe, a Christian extremist in 1994, And so in John Doe's head, yeah, this is how he's going to embody this crime. And this was something that I kind of struggled with in Woman of the Hour, is there's this temptation to superimpose modern values on the past, and it's tough. It's a slippery slope. The way in which I struggled with it in Woman of the Hour is, if you do find, you can find the clips of Rodney Alcala on The Dating Game, like just his section of it. And you hear him speak and you're just like, oh, wow, that dude's a serial killer. Fucking run. He's creepy. His jokes are sort of lewd and off-putting. But in 1978, that was considered charming. It wasn't lewd and off-putting. They didn't know about him then or at least the Bachelorette, what we know now. And so if you take his literal words and put that in the film now, then you risk the audience going, oh, well, she's stupid because she doesn't see that he's clearly a creep. The editing that we did was in service of giving modern audiences the emotional experience that audiences in 1978 had, which is sort of a tricky needle to thread.
Yeah.
But anyways, sorry, I'm kind of getting off topic, but that
is really interesting in thinking about that, because again, in this movie now watching it, I just think it also shows a lot of apathy. I mean, this whole movie is about apathy, but especially when they show the guys I made that weird knife dildo, weird fucks come in all the time. It's just this
he literally
apathy
says, I've made worse.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He says, I've made worse. This isn't weird. And it just shows to you a violent and apathetic society that, I mean, it's still kind of relevant today, And I think that's what's harrowing about Se7en is now it's well, I mean, I feel it still feels so relevant in terms of a more a cultural apathy about, Yeah,
definitely. It's funny because I think there are some movies where the goal is to speak to the moment, and I would put Woman of the Hour in that camp. And there's other movies where they kind of want to speak more broadly, not across place, but across time, And I do think Se7en can, but for that reason, it will always feel like it's speaking to the moment, But yeah, no, I mean, there's, when they interview the owner of, I think in the script, they call it a massage parlor, they're alternating between the two interrogations. The manager or whatever he is, Brad Pitt says, do you like what you do for a living? Do you like these things you see? And he leans in and he's very serious and he says, no, I don't, but that's life, Yeah. And so you kind of feel like even this guy who seems kind of sleazy and kind of awful, he doesn't love the position that he's in. He doesn't love the life he's forced to live. But kind of what other choice does he have? And that's kind of where the movie gets really sort of morally complicated and kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, it's so I've had kind of an evolving appreciation for this film. Unlike you two, I did not like this in my first watch.
Oh.
So it came out in 95. I was 14 at the time, and I've mentioned this in the podcast a few times, but at that point in time, my parents used to let me watch a lot of rated R films when I was a little kid. Hence, I saw Alien, I saw The Thing, I saw The Blob. But at some point, they started to get a bit more conservative, both in their politics, but as well as in what they would allow me to see. And so the 90s, particularly up until about, I would say when I was of age, when I was 18 and was able to rent movies on my own, I didn't watch a lot of horror movies. It was a period where I retreated into novels and I read a bunch of Stephen King books and Dean Koontz and Clive Barker. That was untapped market. I even started reading read Easton Ellis's books. It was a time where I could get my hands on any book, but any kind of movie, forget about it. But
Mhm.
I remember seeing the trailers for this as a 15-year-old and being like, this looks gnarly. And when I finally was able to watch it, it was I can't honestly remember how old I was. It was either I was probably somewhere between 18 and 20 when I was finally able to like get it on my own and watch it. But I remember at that point, I mean, if you're thinking back to like the mid 90s, it was all teen horror, right? It was a lot of like slashers. We had Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend and like all of these types of slasher films that were about like a killer cutting people up and you see it. So like by the time I got to this movie, I was like, ooh, this is about a serial killer. So I'm thinking in my mind, slashers, and but it's all about the 7 deadly sins. And so I remember watching this, and it's the opening is the gluttony guy, and I'm like, well, this is gross, but where's the where's the
Yeah.
And so I had like a hard time as an 18-year-old going, ugh, this movie, it's like we're seeing the aftermath of it, and I did not have the same appreciation for what I was seeing, to the point that I had actually turned it off, and I was like, I'm not going to watch this. When my friend said,
Terry.
Yeah. And when my friend said, no, you need to watch this. We need to talk about the ending. And so I was like, okay. So I sat down again and I was like, okay, I rented it again one weekend and I was like, I'm going to watch it. So I watched it. And I think at that point I started to have a better appreciation for it, because I remember the moment when we get to the sloth scene and I was like, this is really gross. And then the moment when he jerks up and you realize he's not dead, it kind of broke my brain at one point while watching it. And I just remember sitting in a daze for the last half of the film and feeling somewhat unsatisfied by the ending, but like in the moment unsatisfied, because it did not give us closure. It did not give us a nice little, the killer's revealed, the final girl saves the day. And so I was like kind of disappointed, but then it just stuck in my head, and I became so obsessed with this that I was like, I gotta see his other movies. And I think I might have been 18 at the time, because I remember going to renting The Game and watching that and being like enamored with it. And then
Alien
Fight Club
3,
had come
Terry,
out.
come on. David Fincher directed Alien 3.
Oh, I know. Trust me, I know. My very first R-rated movie experience in a movie theater was Alien 3.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
David Fincher forever.
Yeah.
David Fincher
And
forever.
I mean, I've written on Dread Central about this movie. That movie holds a very special place in my heart. But like, yeah, I remember being like kind of annoyed with the film, and yet it would not leave my head, to the point that I became obsessed with it. So it was kind of a weird experience watching it as a kid for me, for as 18-year-old or whatever.
No, it's fun. I have other movies where I've had very similar experiences. Did you ever see The Other? Not The Others, plural, but The Other.
Oh my God, the 1970 movie?
Yeah.
We saw it for the first time on this podcast because one of our guests brought it, and I'd never heard of it before.
Oh, yeah.
And so
this one was so weird.
So good. But I had never even heard of that movie until one of our former guests brought it on the show.
Yeah, I first saw it, again, I was probably, 20 years old, something like that. And I think I stopped it midway through because I thought it was dull. And it wasn't until I tried it again, like, almost 10 years later, where I'm just like, it wasn't doing what I wanted. I wanted it to be Evil Dead. I wanted it to be like scary with a capital S, and instead it's scary with a lowercase s. It's moody and it's atmospheric and it's all that good stuff. And now it's turned into one of these movies I just watch, if not every year, then every other year, something like that. And so it's weird. Some movies, they just kind of grow on you,
Yeah.
I quote Se7en constantly around this house, by the way.
What's your favorite?
What do you quote?
What's in the box? Whenever I get a package, my husband and I will be like, what's in the box? Like, it's dumb. It's like, obviously they're going to say that, but it's always the what's in the box line.
It has one of my favorite movie lines, and it's so fucking haunting, where it's after the sloth victim, that has woken up and he starts coughing. And then it cuts to Mills and Somerset, and they're at the hospital, and they're talking to the doctor, who says like he's chewed off his tongue and he, can't talk. And then the doctor says something like, he's just like, it's funny, he's experienced as much pain or suffering as anyone I've encountered, and he still has hell to look forward to. And it's just like
that line.
It's just like so much.
Such a good line.
My other favorite line is when, again, it's like at the end when we're revealing everything, and he Kevin Spacey, John Doe says, sorry, I had to say it.
No, you have to.
John Doe is revealing that Brad Pitt's wife was pregnant, and he goes, "Oh, he didn't know."
Yeah.
And it's the most hot. My stepdad will say that to me. He's like, "Oh, she didn't know." I'm like, why do we're so fucked up that we find that funny? But like, it's such a scary line that I think again like epitomizes John Doe's like just a skinny fucking nobody, but he's capable of such horrific things and such horrific manipulation, and like, it's just such a dagger in the heart of just him being like, I love being in control of a scenario. And also, just that whole aspect of him handing himself in, like, you know, we have this whole movie where we're looking for John Doe. Who is this guy? This guy's committed all these crazy fucking murders. And then all of a sudden, he just shows up and reveals himself and hands himself in. And you go, when I was younger, I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean he turned himself in? Bad guys don't do that. Bad guys don't just turn themselves in like that. And so I was just like, what could possibly happen? And then everything happened. And I was like, I didn't know movies could do that, everybody. Like, I was just floored that was something you could do with a narrative. I was just
that was something, I think that was also what annoyed me, though, is that, you know, again...
No taste. At 18 years old, no taste, Terry.
I did not have taste. When I was 18 and through my early 20s, did not have taste. But yeah, no, but I was raised again on the slasher and like the idea that he's going to reveal, he's going to explain everything, and then he's going to be killed by the final girl. So I think by the time that it's revealed, and I'm like, the movie's not over yet. And this is sort of like not the guy was, you know, the best friend of something or another, or, you know, it was someone else all the entire time. It was just some random weird looking dude. And it wasn't even like a big moment. And so I think all of that kind of deflated me in my mind, because again, I was being fed a lot of slashers, and so I was expecting a formulaic movie, and that is not what you get with this film.
Well, I will say, in defense of 18-year-old Terry, there's like, there's something tricky about movies that you'll hear, you know, there will be movies that come out where it's a feel-bad movie. The goal is to make you feel awful, and then it succeeds and you feel awful. Whether or not you then turn around and say like, oh, I like this, is kind of a tricky thing to get to emotionally. And like, there are movies where I'm just like, oh, it set out to make me feel bad, but it did it with sort of skill and style, and I kind of like it. Like, I'm one of the few people that will defend like The Counselor, you know, which is just like a miserable movie. Did you see that? It's the Ridley Scott movie based on the Cormac McCarthy script.
I think I have, but I don't remember much about it.
It just got trounced by the critics when it came out, and it was trounced because they're just like, it's a miserable movie. And it's like, yeah, but it wants to be a miserable movie. It's trying to make you feel miserable. You can't fault it for that. But also, sometimes you just can, you know? And so it's hard. Like, I actually do sort of sympathize with that, because like, every step of the way, like John Doe turning himself in, the goal of that is to take away catharsis. It is the thing that audiences want. It is trying to, and it's just, and so it's, you know, it's trying to frustrate you, and then it works, you know?
It sure did, 18-year-old Terry. Now as an adult, like, I'm 43 years old. I love this movie so much. This was probably the first time I've seen it in maybe a decade, but like, sitting down to watch it, I was like, every single beat was like hitting for me in ways that it didn't when I was 18. But I think that is why this movie is so interesting. And I think my relationship to the narrative has changed over the years, because there was a time where like I was really kind of annoyed with this film because of what it does to Gwyneth Paltrow, because she's not even really a character.
No, that's fair.
But
incredibly valid. Incredibly valid.
That said, though, on this watch, I was like, no, I think that's kind of the point. Like, we're following these two characters who are so obsessed with the murder and the mayhem of what is happening in the city, that they are not seeing what is happening in their own lives, particularly Brad Pitt. And the fact that we've kind of needled in this idea of wrath, of how, you know, he's trying to like step up and be the replacement for this veteran. He's a rookie, you know, he's very focused on bringing justice. And so he is not even paying attention to his wife. And so the movie sort of puts us in his shoes and takes us away from being able to see her as a real person. She's just we see her just in a few scenes. And so I have a little bit more of appreciation for it, where like earlier I was like, she's not even really a character. And I still think that might be a valid critique of the film, yet at the same time, I'm like, I think it's purposeful.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I've definitely flip-flopped on that a lot, and I don't think I have a full answer, because, like, she has some, like, really, I think, important moments in terms of, like, trying to provide a foil, and it's frustrating that it's, like, the blonde white woman who is the foil of hope in, like, the city, you know, like, it's not, you know, it's a little clunky in that regard. I think that they try, there's, like, this is such a masculine movie, but not in like a hyper macho way, but just like it has that vibe, and her character is so outside of that, which again I think is both purposeful and also like, where else do you put her in this movie? And it's not an excuse, but I don't think they had room for her in this movie, which again, you can read it in different ways, because I do think Fincher has like really interesting female characters in some of his movies. I know he didn't write this one. It is like a really interesting character that when I was young, like a little bit younger, I was like, this movie hates women. And I'm like, no, this movie just like kind of hates everybody. Like, it doesn't really hate. It's just, again, it's got like that cosmic apathy to it that I think is even more depressing, but I think is the point. Again, like, I think that cosmic apathy of like, yeah, she's pregnant, we're gonna fucking decapitate her anyway. Like, such a taboo, you know what I mean? Like, people are so like, pregnant women are sacred, and they're like, no, we're just gonna put her head in a box. And it's just like, that she's this like little vision of hope and light, and they destroy it. Which again, women, unfortunately, a lot of times fill that role in these movies. But here, it is unfortunately important. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where you're like, ugh, and also, it's the 90s too, so you're like, again, the morality thing of like, 90s gender politics are a little bit what we like to call iffy.
Yes.
But yeah, it's I'm glad you brought that up though, Terry, because it is sticky, like her character. She's so important, and also she becomes kind of just like fodder for the plot. But, you know.
I mean, you could look at it very, like, cynically as her just being a plot point, because the only thing she does is she brings them together. You know, she confesses to Morgan Freeman's character that, you know, she's pregnant and she hasn't told her husband yet. And then she's a head in a box. Like, that is really her big 3 moments in the film. So it's a valid critique. I just, as watching it now and looking at the structure of the film, I do kind of wonder if that's purposeful, if we're supposed to forget about her so that by the end of the movie, because I honestly think Brad Pitt's character has forgotten about her through most of this film, and we're in his head the entire time, so that by the end, it's like, look what you did, dude.
I think it could be a little bit of both, you know? I don't think it's necessarily one or the other, but I do think that to a certain degree, all the characters sort of operate as symbols, you know?
Yeah.
Like in these very sort of symbol with a capital S kind of way. Brad Pitt's character is very much, you know, the desire to make the world a better place. You know, that's his character in scene after scene. Morgan Freeman's character is very much like apathy, like get a cabin in the woods, leave everything behind. And so they're kind of painted in slightly broad brushstrokes. Like, I mean, you know, that's the thing that I see as very intentional. Like, you know, you kind of only learn a few details about Morgan Freeman throughout the movie. And I think screenwriters show their hand not just by what they include, but by what they leave out. And, you know, you spend a lot of time, again, in bars listening to these 2 guys talk. And, you know, at one point you learn that he had a girlfriend that got pregnant. And in terms of other backstory, I'm not sure there's really a whole lot else there. And so to me, that's the filmmaker sort of signaling, oh, this is the lens through which you should read this character, not as strict realism, but in the same way that we read the city as not quite Los Angeles, not quite New York, but city with a capital C. And so, yeah, I think the Gwyneth Paltrow character is sort of being constructed in a similar way.
What surprised me is how warm this movie feels. Like, the way it's shot is very warm, if that makes sense. Like, it makes, like, the lights, there's not a lot of overhead lights. Everything is like the kind of the very dim lighting with, and everything is, the color scheme is a lot of browns, but a lot of warm kind of earthy tones, and it makes it feel very incongruous to what's happening on screen. I was really enamored on this watch, just looking at the way in which every scene is set, because at one point in my notes I wrote, does no one in this city have ceiling lights? Because the only time we ever see like
Who
ceiling
uses
lights
their ceiling
is...
lights? Terry, you crazy? Whoever uses... Are you using your overhead?
Yeah, I have an overhead light right now. Which is... It's funny because like one of the like the things that's like on TikTok right now with gays is like, you're at a gay person's house and they don't use the ceiling lights, but like
Shut up! Fuck you!
But no one like outside of like the library, which again you see them, but they don't really provide a whole lot of light. And then the police department, every single scene is lit with just these very warm colored kind of golden hue lights, lamps on the walls, lamps. And so like it really, again, that kind of not wanting to make you feel uncomfortable, that combined with the absolute horror of what we're seeing on the screen is a really dichotomous type thing.
Well, it's funny, I'm blanking on his name, but the cinematographer in it, apparently before that he was known for doing like perfume commercials, like, and like there was I think I heard that Fincher got like some pushback on like, why are you getting this guy? All he does is film like, $1 million bracelets and fancy perfumes, and he's just like, I want the movie to look beautiful, and then when he turned it in,
successful,
there was like, I think it was like an exec at New Line or something said like, congratulations, you just made a $30 million European art film.
Wow.
But did you, you can cut this out if you guys have already heard it, but I take it you heard the story about the script and how it almost got made in a very different form?
A little bit. Elaborate. They weren't happy with the ending. I do know that.
Yeah. So basically they sent the script to Fincher for consideration after an earlier director dropped out, but they accidentally sent the wrong draft, which then the wrong draft was the head in the box ending, and they had totally rewritten it. So it was like, John Doe steals Gwyneth Paltrow and takes her to a burned out church, and then the cops have to go and save her, and they rescue her at the last moment, and John Doe dies, and it was like a very standard Hollywood ending.
Oh.
And but they sent the head in the box ending to Fincher, who read it, and he's just like, oh my God, they're making this? This is insane. Yes, I'll do it. And the agent is like, oh, actually, I sent you the wrong draft. Let me send you the new, better draft. And they sent him the new, better draft. And he's like, no, this is garbage. I won't do it. I'll do the first draft, but not this draft. And then apparently he had to proceed as though he was making the studio's version, because they're just like, nope, this is what we're doing. And somehow got like Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, and Gwyneth Paltrow to all have it written into their contracts that they would only do the movie if it was the first draft.
Wow.
And it was...
movie making is magic.
I was going to say, that story makes me so happy.
I love that.
Wow. So you mentioned the cinematographer, and I just wanted to kind of tackle Darius Kanji. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce his last name, but what an amazing career if you look at what he's done since then. He did Alien Resurrection, but he also did The City of Lost Children right before Se7en. And then
okay.
He did The Beach. He worked Panic Room. Former guest of the show, Carter Smith, he shot The Ruins. He shot the remake of Funny Games.
What the hell?
He did
Amore, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So like,
sorry,
a career.
that movie is
like what a wonderful career. And then also apparently Taylor Swift's "Look at What You Made Me Do." He did that music video. So we got range here.
It's a beautiful movie. It's really gorgeous.
Wow.
Darkly so, but yeah, very beautiful.
For better or for worse, watching this also in 2024 and seeing the way it has kind of influenced cinema, like you watch this now and you're like, oh, this opening credits set to the Nine Inch Nails Closer Precursor remix. We have like the editing that we see used so much in the early aughts horror films, particularly. I'm thinking about like the remakes of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or even like the Dark Castle films, that kind of weird editing style. Like from the opening of this film, I do feel that the look of this film, Batman Begins and Christopher Nolan's films are indebted to kind of the feel of this film. Like you see this, you watch this film now with like the 30 years. That's ridiculous, by the way.
Shut
30
up.
years of, I know. Makes me feel old. With the 30 years of time between that, and you can see the indelible mark, for better and for worse in some cases, this movie has sort of made. I mean, Saw is basically like riffing on this movie in some ways. Like there's
Oh,
that
that's a good
moment where
point.
I can't remember which one it was, but he has like, oh, it was the woman in bed where she's given the phone, you know, glued to one hand and pills to the other. It's like, make a choice. Like I almost could see Jigsaw saying, here's your chance, make your choice, live or
Dun,
die.
dun, dun.
You know?
Dun, dun, dun.
So it's like you you see the way this film, I think, has like influenced. And you mentioned, Ian, earlier about the watch this with Kiss the Girls, the Alex Cross movie.
Yeah,
and you kind of like see if they had gone with the ending that they meant to send Fincher, I think this would have been in the same category in some ways as that movie. The choices it makes and the way in which it is able to be completely different than a lot of the serial killer movies of that time frame is why we're talking about it today.
Oh yeah, totally. And I mean, you know, I'm not trying to beat up on other movies because honestly,
no, of course not.
Whenever any movie gets made, it's a miracle. The worst movie I've ever seen was still really, really fucking hard to make. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
A lot of people thought they were doing good work. They were trying really hard. They had their best intentions, you know, and the absolute best movie I've ever seen probably still had a lot of like weighing, you know, artistic intention with like commercial necessity, like that, you know, and so it's hard to, you know, but at the same time, when great movies happen, it's something more than a miracle. I don't even, you know, they're just accidents, you know. And this is like one of those really special accidents that like kind of shouldn't have happened. Like, you know, I read this one, but another one of those like kind of weird accident movies was Being John Malkovich, where like it was I can't remember what studio made it, but basically there was a changing of the guards in terms of the head of the studio, and like the new head of the studio basically said everything that's in production is shut down. We're not doing any of those. And this was supposed to be one of those movies, but it was the lowest budgeted film they had on their slate, and it was so low that they didn't actually interpret it as a movie in production, and so they just overlooked that it was getting made, you know? And so
wow, my God.
And so like, again, you know, these great movies, the movies that truly kind of march to the beat of their own drum, you know, it's usually an accident in some way, you know, or they have like one of those special champions that like helps them get made. And anyways, it's always sort of incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just finished making my first movie, so I am feeling that very deeply inside of my body and my bones. So
oh my God, congratulations. How long were you working on it?
Year and a half, I guess. It's having its world premiere on Saturday, actually. Oh Jesus!
Wow, that's great. Where's the premiere?
Horror Hound in Cincinnati, Ohio.
That's so fucking cool. I love Horror Hound.
Oh really? Oh neat. Yes, yeah. Yes. I'm having
I have such a soft spot for that magazine. Like,
oh, that's awesome! Yay!
Congratulations!
Yeah. Thank you.
What's it called? So I can keep an eye out for it.
It's called Bystanders. It's a rape revenge movie. Speaking of being into weird shit, that's me.
Well, thank you very much. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, making movies is a miracle in and of itself.
It really is.
The fact that any movie ever gets made is a miracle. On that note, do we want to wrap this up and give us our rating out of 5? I feel like we could probably talk about this movie for days, but I feel like we should probably. All right, Terry. Yep. I love to hear what you think. How many What's in the Boxes out of 5 do you give Se7en now versus when you were 18 years old?
I gotta just also say, how attractive Brad Pitt was in this movie. Like, 18-year-old Terry, who was closeted at the time, was like, that was a reason to watch this as it was. But
between this and Fight Club, are you fucking... David Fincher did a number on me as a high school student.
Actually, I'm so sorry. Can I interrupt your rating quickly to just tell you one more story about this, which you will love?
Absolutely.
Did you hear the story about the first test screening of this movie?
No.
Okay, so they did a test screening, you know, and it was someplace in like, you know, the suburbs of Los Angeles. And it was one of the most notoriously bad test screen. You know, the what people were writing on the cards were things like, whoever made this movie should be killed, you know. And afterwards, Fincher's like, look, I know it's a tough movie, but these responses are weird, you know. Can I see how you, like, how did you petition people to come see this movie. And he got one of the flyers that they had just gone to malls and handed out flyers. Come see this new movie starring Brad Pitt, star of Legends of the Fall. And so you had all of these.
Oh, not Legends of the Fall.
Yeah. Oh, it was like Legends of the Fall and like Meet Joe Black. And so people showed up thinking they were seeing that. And then it's just like, or not.
I cannot imagine going in with that expectation in mind and then watching what is on screen. Like, yes, I can understand that feedback on that. Wild. No, I had no idea that they had done that.
I was just thinking.
I'm glad she brought it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, but he's really good in this, and that ending scene in particular, just the emotion seeing on his face is like, okay, you can see why he's more than just a pretty face that, you know, was getting people in to see a test screening of Seven. But yeah, no, if you had asked me this when I was 18, I probably would have given it a 3-star rating. In fact, I think on Letterboxd, when I went to go at it again, I still had like a 3-star rating because I was probably going off of memory.
That's actually higher than what I thought you would give it as a child. So,
oh really?
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, as an adult seeing, I think the narrative is complex. I think what it's doing is very smart. I think it is shot incredibly well. I do think Fincher had a chip on his shoulder and something to prove after the trouble he had with Alien 3. So I think that this is a filmmaker that's like, let me do my debut feature, quote unquote, again. Let me show you what I can do. Although, again, I hold Alien 3 as a soft spot in my heart for many different reasons. But I do think that this is like everyone firing on all cylinders with this film, and the fact that it has such a lasting impact on cinema and also on the way in which we talk about it now, 30 odd years later. It's 5. It's 5 Gwyneth Paltrow's head in the boxes. What's in the box out of 5? What about you, Mary Beth?
Yeah, it's been a 5 since I was 13. Yeah, it's been a 5 forever. It'll always be a 5. This movie not only brought me closer to my stepdad, but I also just think shaped a lot of my taste in movies. I mean, anyone who listens to this podcast knows I really love disturbing weird shit, and I think this was like very much an encouragement in that direction. Let's just say the Netflix queue at my house included a lot of Lars von Trier and things after watching a movie like this. So, yeah.
Se7en, a gateway horror.
Well, for me, who had unfettered access to the internet when she was a teenager and learned how to torrent things at a young age, too. Yay! But yeah, 5 out of 5. 5 Gwyneth Paltrow's head in a box for sure. Forever. And Ian, you have the final word. I'm pretty sure we know, but how many what's in the box out of 5 do you give 7?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, it's the first movie that made me look up who the screenwriter was, you know?
Oh, that's so cool.
In that way, it's like, you know, it had a very profound effect on my life, you know? And so, yeah, it's a 5 heads in a box out of 5. It's
cute.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Ian, for joining us to talk about Se7en. Are you online? Where can the listeners find you? And the floor is yours to plug away.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm on Instagram. It's just at Ian MACMC. And I think that's it. But yeah, just keep an eye out for Woman of the Hour, which is dropping on Netflix on October 18th. It's getting a limited theatrical release on starting October 11th. So if you can see it in theaters, even better. But yeah, thank you both so much for having me on. This was such a pleasure. I could just talk about this and just movies forever. So I so appreciate it.
Hell yeah.
We love it. And getting an excuse to gush about this movie, obviously. But listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience watching Se7en? I personally would absolutely love to hear it. You can let us know by sending us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us directly on social media. You can find me on Twitter at mbmcandrews and on Instagram at mb.mcandrews.
And you can find me at Gaily Dreadful everywhere.
And obviously follow the podcast on socials. We are on Twitter and Blue Sky at Scarred Podcast and on Instagram at Scarred for Life Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we do have a Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there. Most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.